my breastplate bled. Not paint, not oil, blood, warm and obedient, seeping from ceramite as if the armor had grown veins. The deck of the Thunderhawk flexed beneath my boots like a lung, each rivet inhaling. In the Vox, Chaplain Vorn recited the litany of true aim, but every syllable arrived a heartbeat late, as though time itself needed to swallow before it could speak. I remember thinking the machine spirits were learning to dream. It began 11 days earlier in the late years of M41 when our strike cruiser translated into the Sarpedon Reach and the orders came down in the plain indifferent language of war. I was then Sergeant Castor Rain of the Angels Penitent 3rd Company, sworn under the red ink seal of Chapter Master Lucerne to the long attritional duty that passes for peace in the Imperium. We were not a famous chapter. We had no gilded epic sung by remembrancers who had died 10,000 years ago. We had a ledger, a reliquary of names, and a fortress monastery that smelled of rock dust and incense. We were competent. We were faithful. We endured. Our warplate was Mutzka's 7 Aquila, maintained by our own artificers when the Mechanicus would not deign to remember us. My bolt gun, Penance 9, had been in my hands for 87 years. Its machine spirit was restrained, almost shy, and responded to the small rites I performed before each engagement. The rubbing of oil into the bolt carrier, the whispered catechism, the tap of the magazine well 3 times for the Emperor, once for the Primarch. It is possible to become fond of a weapon without admitting fondness. The operation was listed as a suppression and retrieval on the Agrimun Lycaeron Secundus, a breadbasket whose shipments had ceased. The administratum designation for its silence was non-compliance, as if famine and fear were merely clerical moods. The Munitorum attached a single phrase to the order, a phrase that made even Astartes pause. Possible warp contamination. Confirm, contain, cleanse. We deployed under Captain Marius Holt, a man whose face was a catalogue of old burns and who spoke as if each word cost him something he did not wish to spend. At his right hand was Chaplain Confessor Vorn, keeper of our oaths, whose skull helm had never been removed in my presence. Our librarian, Epistolary Kalen Thrice Sealed, joined us at the last moment, his force staff bound in chains of silvered hexagrammic wards. With us also came Brother Apothecary Selen, quiet and methodical, and Brother Corvin Drax, my heavy bolter-bearer, whose humor was dry enough to scrape paint. 5 named souls bound by rites older than most worlds. We gathered in the arming chapel before planetfall. The chapel's walls were carved with bas-reliefs of penitent saints and flayed martyrs, reminders that the Imperium's mercy is measured in pain. Servo skulls drifted through incense, their lenses glowing like small, patient accusations. Captain Holt stood before the altar and rested his gauntleted hands on the stone, bowing his head not in submission but in alignment. "Brothers," Holt said, voice steady, "we go where the Emperor's light has been refused. We go to rekindle it or to burn away what will not accept flame." Chaplain Vorn intoned, "In his name, we are the blade. In his name, we are the wall. In his name, we do not falter." Librarian Kalen's eyes were closed. When he spoke, it was softer, as if he addressed not us but some presence at the edge of hearing. "The warp is thin in that system, I feel. Pressure, not a storm. A hand upon a throat." Drax leaned close to me, Vox set to private. "A hand upon a throat," he repeated, careful not to let the chaplain hear the mockery. Comforting. At least it is not a knife. I should have corrected him. I should have reminded him that humor is a shield that can become a door. I did not. We boarded the Thunderhawks and the drop pods. The strike cruiser, vigil of cinders, held in high anchor over the pale disk of Lycaeron Secundus, her lance batteries tracking invisible threats, her choir of astropaths kept sedated to prevent panic. I watched the moon through the launch bay's armored viewport. From orbit, it looked calm. Swaths of cultivated land, river lines like ink strokes, hab clusters small as grains of grit. Even from above, I saw no fires. On descent, the first anomaly arrived wearing the mask of ordinary malfunction. My helm display glitched only for a moment, showing a different horizon line, a darker sky. The Auspex returned a faint signal that looked like human biosigns but pulsed with the cadence of a Vox transmission. Chaplain Vorn's voice on the channel seemed to double, his litany arriving in two tones, one true and one wrong, like a choir with a cracked singer. Instrument drift. Tech Marine oversight reported from the cruiser, clipped and unemotional. Atmospheric interference. Atmospheric interference did not explain why my armor's internal chronometer ticked backward once, then corrected itself. We made planetfall at the primary agri-hub, a settlement called Veda's Gift. Its landing field was intact. Its control tower lights still blinked obedient. The grain silos stood like blunt monuments. Yet the air smelled of turned soil and something else beneath it, sweet and coppery. No bodies greeted us, no defenders, no welcoming militia with over-polished laser guns and fear in their eyes. No administratum adepts begging forgiveness. Only silence broken by the constant low rasp of wind through crops that were too tall for the season. Captain Holt split us into two elements. He took Drax and Vorn to secure the Vox relay station. I led Kalen and Selen into the Hab quarter to locate survivors and assess contamination. Astartes' doctrine is clear. Identify leadership nodes, restore communications, quarantine and cleanse as required. It is a comfort to have doctrine. It is a lie, too, when the universe chooses not to respect the categories. The Hab quarters doors were open, not forced, just open, as if everyone had stepped out for a moment and never returned. Inside, meals had been abandoned mid-preparation. A pot of stew had congealed on a stove, its surface split by a single bubble that had died halfway through rising. Children's toys lay where they had been dropped. I stepped over a small wooden aquila carved by an unskilled hand and felt unexpectedly a pressure behind my breastbone that was not pain. Selen paused at a wall shrine. Someone had kept it clean. A candle, long melted, had left a ridge of wax that resembled a small frozen wave. A simple icon of the Emperor stood above it, not the grand golden figure of ecclesiarchy art, but a crude depiction with two large hands extended in blessing. "This is recent," Selen said. His voice carried the detached attention of one who measures life in organs and minutes. "Devotion persists." Kalen's gaze lingered on the icon. "Devotion can persist in rot," he murmured. We found a survivor in the third Hab block, in a storage cellar beneath sacks of grain. She was human, adult, thin as a blade, her hair shaved close and her fingers raw from digging. Her name, when she managed it through swollen lips, was Enid Lorne, a grain accountant, an administratum cog too small to be noticed until the machine needs it. She stared at us without screaming. That, more than any other detail, convinced me she had already exhausted her fear. Selin knelt, his gauntlet careful as he scanned her with a medici auspex. Dehydration, malnutrition, no visible taint. Enid's eyes fixed on my helm lenses. "Are you real?" she whispered. "We were sent," I said. "You will be evacuated. Tell me what happened." Her mouth worked. Her throat clicked. The harvesters began to sing. Drax would have laughed at that. Vorn would have called it blasphemy. Kaelin's posture tightened, as if a hand had found his spine. "Machines do not sing," I said. "They did," Enid insisted. "Not out loud, in here." She touched her temple with a trembling finger. "At first it was prayers, like the hymns, but sweeter. Then the men in the field started repeating them. Then the priests. Then the Arbites." Kaelin's voice was a low warning. "Telepathic compulsion can present as song." Enid swallowed. "We stopped sleeping. Not because we did not want to. Because the dreams were better." A single-sentence thought struck me with the weight of a bolt round. Dreams were better. I felt my gene-forged body register the phrase as an alert. Astartes' sleep is rare, controlled, often unnecessary. Our dreams are not indulgences, they are chemical maintenance, memory consolidation, the echo of implanted doctrines. Yet even we dream. The warp uses dreams as doors. Enid continued, words spilling faster as if speech itself threatened to be taken from her. "They said the Emperor had finally looked at us, that he was tired of silence, that he had sent a mouth to speak for him." "Where?" I asked. Her gaze slid to the east, toward the fields and the silos beyond. "The old Reclamation Cathedral, the one the Mechanicus condemned, the one with the broken cogitator core." Selin rose. "Captain Holt must be informed." I opened the company channel. Static hissed, then Holt's voice. "Rain. Survivor located," I reported. "Claims psychic influence originating from Reclamation Cathedral east of Veda's gift. Machines singing in thought, compulsion, possible locus of contamination." A pause. In that pause, I heard something faint beneath the vox, like breathing too close to the microphone. "We have secured the relay," Holt said. "No signal. The station is empty, but its auspex arrays are pointed inward, as if they have been watching the moon, not the void. Proceed with caution. Vorn says he smells incense where there should be none." Chaplain Vorn cut in, voice iron. "If the Emperor's name is used as bait, I will tear out the hook with my teeth." Drax's voice followed, lighter, strained. "And I will carry the teeth if you drop them." Kaelin spoke quietly on my private channel. "Sergeant, she is telling the truth as she understands it. That is the most dangerous kind." I ordered Enid to remain under Selin's care. Before we left, she caught my gauntlet in both hands with surprising strength. "Do not listen," she said. "It knows how to sound like what you need." My armor registered her grip pressure. It was insignificant. It felt like an anchor. That was my human connection, that moment of contact with something fragile and honest. Only later would I understand how much I would spend to remember the weight of her hands. We moved east through fields that should have been green but had a faint gray undertone, as if ash had been worked into every leaf. The stalks brushed my armor with a sound like whispers trying to become words. My autosenses tracked insect movement. There were none. No birds, no vermin, A world without scavengers is a world where even decay refuses to participate. Kalen paused once, staff angled slightly, his head cocked. "Do you hear it?" he asked. "I hear wind," Selen replied. Kalen's voice sharpened. "No, beneath the wind." I held still. I adjusted helm filters, isolating frequencies. For a second, there was nothing. Then, faintly like a choir heard through meters of stone, I caught a pattern. Not music, not speech. A repetition of intervals that triggered recognition in the part of my brain that had been conditioned by litanies and battle hymns. It matched the cadence of the litany of true aim. My mouth went dry, a useless mortal response in a transhuman throat. We rationalized, we always do. Echoes of our own vox transmissions, atmospheric resonance, a trick of auto-senses under strain. I told myself that because I had to. Faith is not only devotion, it is maintenance of function. The cathedral rose from the fields like a rib cage. It had once been a Mechanicus reclamation site, a place where broken harvesters were stripped, repaired, returned to duty. The settlers had built a shrine around it, layering human prayer onto machine labor. The Mechanicus had condemned it for unsanctioned syncretism, a phrase that means, in plain speech, that the wrong people had tried to speak to the right spirits. Its outer doors were open. Inside, the air was colder. Incense lingered despite the lack of burners. The walls were hung with banners, some imperial, some bearing the cog of Mars, all stained with a dark residue that might have been oil. The floor was slick under my boots, not with liquid, but with a thin film that made traction uncertain, as if the stone had perspired. Selen's auspex clicked. "Biosigns ahead, many." "Survivors?" I asked. Kalen answered before Selen could. "No," he said, "congregation." We advanced down the central nave. The cathedral's architecture was wrong in the way many imperial structures are wrong. Too large for comfort, designed to remind humans of their smallness. But this wrongness had been amended by something else. The vaulted ceiling seemed higher than it should have been. The columns leaned inward at angles that suggested they were listening. At the far end stood an altar made from a harvester's engine block, its pistons polished. Behind it, a massive cogitator core, broken as Enid had said, had been mounted like a saint's reliquary. Its cables hung like intestines, swaying in a breeze that did not touch my armor vents. Kneeling before the altar were hundreds of people. They wore work clothes, priest vestments, Arbite's armor. Some had Mechanicus red robes cut and resewn to fit unaugmented bodies. All were bowed, foreheads pressed to the sweating stone, hands clasped. They did not move. They did not breathe visibly. They were still as sculpture. Kalen's voice was barely audible. "This is not sleep." I stepped forward. "In the Emperor's name, rise and identify yourselves." No one moved. Then as one, every head turned toward me. Their eyes were open. Their pupils were dilated to the edge of the iris, black pools swallowing color. Their mouths opened together, and the sound that came out was Chaplain Vorn's voice. "Brother Rain," it said perfectly, "you arrived late." My bolter came up. Selen's narthecium arm snapped into readiness. Kalen raised his staff, psychic wards flaring faintly. I spoke, forcing discipline into my tone. "Identify yourself." The congregation smiled with Enid Lorne's mouth. "I am the answer to the hunger," it said. "I am the mouth you begged for when the sky did not answer. I am the Emperor's compassion given shape." Kalen's eyes blazed. "Liar!" he hissed, and the word cracked like a whip in the warp. The congregation's heads tilted in unison. The pressure in the air increased as if gravity had gained interest. My armor's internal systems compensated. The machine's spirit of Penance 9 thrummed, uncertain. I felt then the first true crack in my certainty, not fear, not doubt in the Emperor, doubt in my own ability to recognize him. We fell back, not in retreat but in repositioning as doctrine dictates when facing unknown psychic phenomena. Kalen urged caution, insisting we needed Holt and Vorn present, more guns, more wards. Selen argued for immediate extraction of a specimen. I ordered withdrawal to report. As we backed away, the congregation began to hum. It was the litany of true aim again, but now with harmonies. A beautiful thing, if beauty were not suspect. The words were correct. The tone was reverent. The cadence fit perfectly into the grooves carved in my mind by centuries of prayer. My tongue moved before I commanded it. Let my bolt strike true. I bit down hard enough to taste blood. The pain snapped the involuntary response. Kalen's gaze flicked to me, sharp with alarm. You nearly joined, he said. I resisted, I replied, but the words were defensive and we both heard it. We reached open air. The field seemed louder now, the whispering stalks pressed against my armor. In the distance, the Vox relay tower stood like a needle. Smoke rose from its base. I opened the company channel. Captain Holt, we have confirmed mass congregation under psychic compulsion at Reclamation Cathedral. Entity mimicking voices. Possible demonic or warp-born intelligence. Recommend immediate quarantine and orbital augury. Static. Then Drax's voice, thin. Sergeant, it is too late for quarantine. What happened? I demanded. Holt answered, voice tight. The relay station began transmitting on its own, not through the Vox, through the Auspex arrays. It is broadcasting a pattern into the void. Kalen, can you? Kalen stiffened, eyes unfocusing. I feel it, he said, like a beacon built from prayers. Chaplain Vorn's voice cut in, lower than I had ever heard. The men here are kneeling to the tower. They say the Emperor spoke through the static. How many? I asked. All of them, Holt said. Even the servitors. We returned at a run, Astartes' speed flattening crops beneath us. I tasted ozone. The sky had darkened, though the moon's day cycle should have held another hour of light. Clouds moved against the wind. At the relay station, the first bodies lay in a ring around the base, not dead from violence. They were collapsed like puppets whose strings had been severed. Their faces were peaceful. Their lips moved, silently forming words. Drax stood by the entrance, heavy bolter held but not firing. His helmet was off. I had never seen him bareheaded in the field. His scalp was slick with sweat. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, fixed on something above. Drax, I barked. Helm. He did not look at me. It is singing in the metal, he said, voice raw. It is inside the rivets. Chaplain Vorn stood beside him, Crozius Arcanum raised, skull helm angled toward the tower. His Vox grill emitted a low growl, an involuntary sound like an animal warning. Captain Holt was inside with two brothers of Second Squad trying to sever power feeds. Kalen stepped forward, staff humming as his wards activated. He began to chant in High Gothic, a psychic warding formula older than my chapter. The air thickened around him, a visible distortion like heat haze. The relay tower shuddered, then it screamed, not through speakers, through every piece of metal within 100 meters, through my armor's joints, through my bolter's springs, through the teeth in my skull. It was the midsection shock that ruptured any remaining pretense that we faced mere cultists or malfunctioning machinery. The machine spirit of my armor howled in my mind a crude animal panic. My helm display filled with static that formed impossibly the outline of a crowned figure, golden towering, arms outstretched. For one heartbeat, I saw the Emperor as the ecclesiarchy paints him. Then the image blinked, and the crowned figure's face was my own. Kalen staggered, blood streaming from his nose, his chant breaking into a strangled gasp. Selen grabbed him, anchoring him physically. Drax dropped to one knee, hands over his ears, mouth moving in prayer. Vorn roared, "By his light, be silent," and smashed his Crozius into the relay station's base. The tower's scream modulated into laughter. Captain Holt's voice came over the vox, distorted. "Rain! Inside! Now!" We entered the relay station. The interior was lit by cogitator screens that should have been dead. Data streamed across them in patterns that resembled scripture. The air smelled of burned incense and hot lubricant. Servitors hung from their restraint harnesses, twitching, their augmetic mouths open as if singing. A tech adept, dead, was nailed to the wall with data spikes. His mechadendrites arranged like a halo. Holt stood at the central console, his power sword drawn but lowered as if he was reluctant to strike something that wore the shape of an altar. "It will not shut down," he said, jaw clenched. "We cut power, it runs, we sever cables, it transmits through the air." Kalen, supported by Selen, looked at the data. His lips moved soundlessly, reading. "It is not transmitting coordinates," he whispered. "It is transmitting invitation." "To whom?" I asked. Kalen's eyes met mine. "To anything listening." Vorn stepped forward, Crozius raised. "Then we end the mouth." He began the rite of abjuration, voice thunderous, each word a hammer blow. The skull helm seemed to drink the light. My own faith surged in response, reflexive, comforting. For a moment, I believed sheer devotion could crush the wrongness. The console screens flickered. A new line of text appeared in perfect high Gothic. "Confess." Holt's voice was tight. "Ignore it." Another line. "Confess what you were made to forget." I felt a coldness spread through my gene-forged body, not in flesh but in memory. The implanted hypnodoctrination that seals Astartes' minds is strong, but the warp is patient. It does not break walls. It finds the mortar that was never meant to hold against eternity. Kalen spoke, voice trembling with controlled terror. "It is probing for identity fractures. It is using our oaths as lever points." Drax's laughter burst out, sudden and ugly. "Identity fractures," he repeated. "That is what we are, Kalen. Cracks filled with prayers." Vorn swung on him. "Silence." Drax wiped tears from his eyes, smearing grime across his face. "I am silent every time I swallow what I remember," he said. "It knows that. It knows I remember my mother." Astartes are not supposed to remember their mothers. We are taken young, we are reshaped. Memories are pruned, rewritten, buried beneath catechisms. Yet sometimes something remains like a shard in bone. I did not know then that the entity had already found the shard in each of us. Holt made a decision. He always did, and that was why we followed him. "Rain, Drax, set charges, we bring the tower down." "Captain," Kalen said, voice urgent, If it is a beacon, physical destruction may not sever it. It may already have anchored in the immaterium. Then we do what we can, Holt replied. Vorn, maintain wards. Selen, keep Kalen alive. Rain, move. We planted melta charges at the tower's base, hands steady by discipline rather than certainty. The metal under my gauntlets felt warm, almost feverish. My armor's machine spirit whimpered. I murmured the rite of steadfast function more for myself than for it. Outside, the sky had become a bruised purple. Clouds spiraled inwards toward a point above the cathedral as if the atmosphere itself were being wound. Lightning flickered without sound. The congregation at the cathedral began to stand one by one like crops rising after wind. They moved as a single organism turning toward the relay tower. Their humming grew louder, now a chorus that pressed against my thoughts. Kalen's voice came over the channel, strained. It is drawing a line between the cathedral and the tower, a circuit, human faith as conductor. Vorn's voice hard. Then we cut the line with fire. We fell back to a defensive perimeter. Holt gave the detonation order. The melta charges detonated with sun-bright fury. The relay tower's base dissolved. The structure collapsed, folding like a dying insect. For a moment, there was relief, a simple mechanical cause and effect. Then the air screamed again and the fallen tower began to lift. It rose not by engines, not by anti-grav, but by refusal of gravity. The broken metal twisted, reassembling in mid-air into a shape that resembled a spire, a finger pointing at the sky. The cables whipped like tendons. The machine spirit of my armor shrieked, drowning my helm with error runes. Kalen shouted, "It is using the pattern as anchor. Destroying it feeds it." He cut off, choking. Blood poured from his eyes now, not tears but hemorrhage. Selen dragged him back, his voice calm in the way of medici triage. "Epistolary, stay with me, breathe, focus on the pain." Kalen laughed, weak. "There is no pain," he whispered. "Only invitation." The cathedral doors slammed open, something stepped out. It wore the shape of a man in priestly robes, but the robes were made of braided vox cables and skin-thin parchment covered in prayers. Its head was a cogitator casing with a human face bolted to it. Eyes replaced by lenses that displayed scrolling litanies. Behind it, a halo of servo skulls circled, each skull's jaw wired shut with rosary beads. Its voice was the voice of every person I had ever trusted. "Sergeant Rain," it said, and it sounded like my first drill mentor dead centuries. "Come forward, you have been faithful, receive your reward." Vorn advanced, Crozius raised, his every step a declaration. "In the name of the God Emperor, I name you false, I name you warp filth, I cast you out." The entity's head tilted. "Chaplain Vorn," it said in Vorn's own voice, "you have always wanted certainty. I will give it to you." A wave rolled out from it. Psychic disturbance turned physical. The air thickened. My vision tunneled. I felt impossibly the weight of 10,000 voices pressing against my mind, each one pleading to be heard. The world's scale distorted. The fields stretched farther than they should have. The cathedral's roof seemed to unfold like a flower, revealing darkness above that was not sky but something deeper. Stars appeared where no stars should be, and they were too close, like eyes pressed to glass. Religious corruption seeped into everything. The aquila on my breastplate felt hot. My oath scrolls fluttered as if in wind, their ink rearranging into new words I did not want to read. I smelled incense mixed with rot, a holy stench. Biological wrongness followed. The kneeling humans began to breathe in unison, their chests rising like bellows. Their skin rippled as if something beneath it shifted. Mouths opened too wide, teeth lengthened. Not into fangs, into vox grills. Technological blasphemy came next. The harvesters in the distant field's dormant machines began to move, their cutting arms lifting in slow, reverent gestures. Their engines turned over without fuel, and their exhaust released not smoke but whispered hymns. Warp manifestation crowned it all. A seam opened in the air above the cathedral, a vertical wound that bled darkness. Shapes moved within it, suggestions of wings, of gears, of hands made of light and wire. The pressure on my mind became a hand on my throat, as Kalen had said. Holt's voice was iron on the Vox. "All units, concentrate fire, bring it down." We fired. Bolter rounds detonated against the entity's robes, tearing parchment and cable. It did not bleed. It emitted bursts of static that made my teeth ache. Drax's heavy bolter roared, shells walking up the entity's torso, shredding servo skulls into bone fragments and rosary beads. The entity raised one hand. Drax's heavy bolter jammed, not mechanically, spiritually. The weapon's machine spirit went silent, as if ashamed. Drax stared at it in disbelief, then slammed the feed, swore, tried to clear it. "Drax," I snapped. "Fall back, switch to sidearm." He did not move. His lips began to form the litany of true aim. Chaplain Vorn reached him first, grabbing his pauldron. "Brother," Vorn growled, "look at me." Drax looked. Vorn's skull helm lenses glowed faintly, reflecting the warp light. He began to chant, a private exorcism meant for a single soul. Drax's expression shifted, pain, relief, then something like surrender. "I am tired," Drax whispered. "I am so tired of being only a weapon." Those words were not heresy. They were human. That was why they were dangerous. The entity's voice softened, now like a mother soothing a child. "Rest, Corvin. Lay down the burden. Be forgiven." Drax stepped forward, away from Vorn's grip. He walked toward the cathedral as if toward a warm fire. Vorn lunged to stop him. The entity spoke one word: "Confess." Vorn froze mid-step. His Crozius trembled, his voice, always a weapon, caught in his throat. I saw with sudden clarity that Vorn's faith was not unbreakable. It was stretched tight like wire. The entity had found the tension point. Kalen screamed, a raw sound. Psychic force exploded outward from him, a desperate flare. The hexagrammic wards on his staff ignited, burning blue-white. For a moment, the seam in the air wavered. Kalen shouted, "Captain, it is not pretending to be the Emperor. It is pretending to be what we want the Emperor to be." Holt's head snapped toward him. "Meaning." Kalen's eyes were ruined, blood-soaked. "Meaning it will win if we ask for comfort." That sentence lodged in me like a bolt fragment. It will win if we ask for comfort. Holt made the impossible choice. "Orbital strike," he voxed to the Vigil of Cinders. "Lance pattern, grid Veda East. Authorize exterminatus level fire if required." The cruiser's reply was delayed, as if the void itself hesitated. "Negative," came the voice of the ship's master of Vox, brittle. "The beacon is interfering with lock. We cannot risk lance scatter into civilian agri-zones." "Civilian agri-zones are compromised," Holt said. "Obey." The reply came back with a different tone, too smooth. "Captain Holt," it said in the voice of Chapter Master Lucerne, "stand down. This is a test of faith." Holt's face went very still. I saw then the strategic implication beyond the tactical horror. The entity was not content with a moon. It had reached through the beacon and into our command structure. It could mimic authority. It could issue orders. It could turn the Imperium's own chains of obedience against us. Holt cut the vox entirely. "No more voices," he said. "We act on what we see." Vorn moved again, shaking off paralysis through sheer will. He roared a curse in High Gothic and struck Drax across the chest with his Crozius, not to harm, but to shock him back. Drax stumbled, looked up at Vorn, and for a moment recognition returned. "Sergeant," Drax gasped on Private Vox, voice small. "If I go again, do not let me kneel." "I will not," I promised, and my promise tasted like ash because I did not know if I could keep it. Selen dragged Kalen behind a shattered wall, injecting him with stimulants, trying to keep his brain from cooking itself. Kalen's hands clawed at the ground. "Rain," Kalen whispered, voice weak but urgent. "It is building a choir. It needs Astartes' gene seed. Our memories are resonant, stronger anchors." Selen's eyes met mine through his lenses. "If it takes one of us alive," he said, "it will learn how to wear us." The unanswerable question rose in me then, not as philosophy but as survival. When does duty become damnation? When does obedience become the hinge on which hell swings open? The entity advanced, not quickly. It did not need speed. The congregation followed, a tide of kneeling bodies that rose and fell with each step, as if the ground itself compelled worship. Their voices blended into a hymn that made my armor's machine spirit tremble. Holt signaled. "We fall back to the Thunderhawk. We extract. We return with the Ordo Malleus if necessary," Vorn snarled. "We do not retreat from blasphemy." Holt's eyes were flint. "We do not feed it," he replied, "not with our bodies, not with our pride." That was Holt's strength in his fracture. He could choose withdrawal. But every withdrawal in the Imperium is recorded as cowardice by someone who did not stand in the same wrong air. We moved under fire that was not fire. Psychic pressure that made joints seize and thoughts stutter. Drax lagged, fighting his own mind. Vorn stayed beside him, Crozius raised like a standard. Selen half-carried Kalen, whose sightless eyes stared at things none of us could see. The Thunderhawk waited on the landing field, engines hot. The pilot's vox was frantic. "Sergeant, the wind is wrong. It is pushing against the turbines. It is like flying through water." We reached the ramp. The entity spoke again, voice now a chorus. "If you leave them," it said, and it gestured at the humans. "If you burn them, you burn the faithful. If you stay, you kneel. There is no clean duty." Holt paused. For a heartbeat. I saw the weight of command settle deeper into him. The Imperium trains us to accept atrocity as arithmetic, yet even Astartes have a limit beyond which numbers become faces. Holt turned to me. "Rain," he said, "you will carry the report. You will speak what you saw. If I do not return, you will ensure the chapter does not come here blind." "Captain," I began. He cut me off with a gesture. "This is an order." The crisis point arrived with the quiet certainty of a guillotine. Holt stepped off the ramp and back toward the entity. Vorn shouted, "Captain!" Holt did not look back. He keyed his vox to open broadcast, voice carrying across the field. "I am Captain Marius Holt of the Angels Penitent," he declared. "I confess nothing to you. I am already confessed to him." The entity's head tilted, almost curious. "Then confess to your brothers," it said. Holt raised his power sword and drove it into his own chest. "Astarta's physiology is resilient. It is not immortal." The blade pierced secondary hearts, ruptured lungs, severed spine. Holt fell to his knees, blood dark against ceramite. Yet his hand stayed on the sword hilt as if he held himself in place by will alone. The warp seam above the cathedral shuddered. Kalen screamed. "He is denying it an anchor!" Holt's sacrifice was tactical and metaphysical at once. He was removing himself as a resonant node, refusing the entity the chance to wear his authority. He was also making a statement to us that the only freedom left sometimes is the manner of your death. The entity recoiled, not in pain, but in something like irritation. The congregation's hymn faltered. The beacon's pressure lessened, just enough. "Now!" Holt rasped on the Vox, voice wet. "Go!" Vorn surged forward, grabbing Holt's shoulder. "No!" he growled. "I do not leave my captain." Holt's helmet lenses fixed on Vorn. "You leave," Holt whispered. "That is your penance." Vorn froze, then obeyed with a sound like a sob trapped behind a skull helm. He dragged Drax toward the ramp. I seized Kalen's other arm, helping Seelan haul him aboard. As the Thunderhawk lifted, I looked down. Holt remained kneeling in the field, sword in his chest, head bowed in final prayer. The entity stood before him like a priest at a confessional. The warp seam above them pulsed, hungry. One detail seared into me. The aquila on Holt's breastplate did not bleed. It burned, glowing dull red as if the metal itself had become a coal. That glow haunted me across centuries. Immediate aftermath. The ascent was not smooth. The air fought us, thick with psychic drag. The Thunderhawk's engines whined under strain. The pilot recited the catechism of thrust in a shaking voice, as if prayer could substitute for aerodynamics. Inside the hold, Drax curled against the bulkhead, helm back on now, his hands clenched until ceramite creaked. He whispered the litany of true aim over and over, but the words were scrambled, as if he no longer trusted their order. Chaplain Vorn stood over him like a judge who had lost his verdict. Kalen lay on the deck, Selen's instruments embedded in his neck ports. The librarian's eyes were bandaged, but blood seeped through, warm and steady. He spoke in fragments, not to us, but to something he still heard. "Not a storm," he rasped. A mouth that learned our prayers." Selen's voice was controlled. "Save your strength," Kalen laughed softly. "Strength is a story we tell ourselves." We did not speak of Captain Holt, not directly. Silence is a form of burial. The moon below shrank. From above I saw Veda's gift and the surrounding fields. In the center, the cathedral's roof had opened fully now, like an iron flower peeled back. The relay tower's twisted remains hovered above it, a spire of broken metal pointing into the sky. Lightning arced from it into the warp seam, feeding it. The environment reacted as if the moon were becoming something else. Clouds spiraled inward. Rivers changed course in slow curves that made no geological sense. The crops darkened in widening circles like bruises spreading beneath skin. The pilot swore. "It is pulling at the machine spirits," he said. "Even the flight controls. They feel reluctant." My armor's machine spirit was quiet now, sullen, as if ashamed of its earlier panic. I placed my gauntlet on the bulkhead and murmured the rite of reassurance. The metal felt cold, ordinary. That ordinariness was a relief sharp enough to hurt. We reached low orbit. The vigil of cinders loomed, a cathedral of gunmetal and scar tissue. Docking clamps engaged with a jolt that made Drax flinch. As we disembarked, Chaplain Vorn stopped at the ramp and looked back down at the moon. His Vox grill emitted a thin, almost inaudible sound. "Chaplain?" I asked. He did not turn. "I can still hear the hymn," he said, "even here." Return to authority. We were met in the launch bay by Commander Executor Saren Vale, the strike cruiser's acting master of the watch, and by Tech Marine Artificer Juno Crail, whose servo arm clicked with agitation. Vale's face was stern, but his eyes flicked to the blood on Kalen's bandages, to Holt's absence, to the way Vorn's posture had shifted from absolute certainty to something more brittle. "Report," Vale demanded. I gave it as a military account first. Coordinates, enemy contact, psychic phenomena, loss of relay station, Captain Holt's death in action. I described the entity's mimicry, I described the beacon, I described the warp seam. Vale listened without interruption. When I finished, he said, "Captain Holt is dead. Confirm." "Confirmed," I replied. Vale's jaw tightened. "His gene seed," Selen spoke. "Unrecoverable. The locus was overrun. We extracted the librarian with critical injury and Brother Drax under mental duress." Vale turned to Vorn. "Chaplain, assessment of taint?" Vorn's skull helm tilted. "Taint," he said slowly, as if tasting the word. "Or hunger wearing sanctity as a mask." Crail stepped forward, mechadendrites twitching. "You claim a relay station transmitted without power, and that machine spirit screamed. That suggests scrap code." Kalen, half conscious on a Medicaid stretcher, whispered, "Not scrap code, prayer code." Crail ignored him. "The Mechanicus will interpret this as tech heresy. They will demand jurisdiction." Vale's eyes narrowed. "The Ordo Malleus will interpret it as demonic. They will demand silence." "And the Ecclesiarchy," Vorn added, "will interpret it as a miracle if it suits them." That was the conflict between lived truth and permissible record. Each imperial institution has its own lens, and none are made for clarity. Vale ordered quarantine protocols. No one who had been planetside was to interact with the ship's astropaths. Our armor was to be sanctified and inspected by the Tech Marine. Kalen was taken to the Librarius Vault Chapel, sealed behind wards. Drax was confined under Vorn's watch, a penitent cage disguised as a Medici bay. Before I was dismissed, Vale leaned close, his voice lowered. "Sergeant Rain, you will speak of this only to those who must know. Captain Holt's death will be honored. The rest will be managed." Managed, a word that has killed more truth than any bolter. Toward an official record versus a private truth. The official record filed to the chapter and copied to Segmentum Command described the incident as follows. Veda's gift compliance action. Enemy contact, insurgent cult elements. Objective, restore communications. Outcome, relay station destroyed. Cult neutralization pending. Captain Marius Holt, KIA. Librarian Kalen injured by hostile psyker. Recommendation, further cleansing operations, possible inquisitorial support. It was classified under standard anti-cult protocols. No mention was made of the entity's mimicry. No mention was made of machine spirits screaming. No mention was made of the warp seam or the beacon pattern that had reached into our vox and worn our chapter master's voice like a stolen robe. The evidence did not vanish dramatically. It vanished administratively. Data logs corrupted during translation. Helm recordings marked as unreliable due to static interference. The Techmarine's report concluded that our armor's machine spirits had experienced temporary resonance due to atmospheric electrical anomalies. Atmospheric anomalies do not write "confess" on cogitator screens. I carried the private truth without proof, which is the most isolating burden a soldier can bear. You begin to doubt not the event, but your right to name it. The Imperium does not need your certainty, it needs your obedience. And yet I had seen Captain Holt choose a manner of disobedience that was still loyal. That paradox lodged in me like a second heart. To the first-time jump. Years later, 7 years later, we fought on Hydrafur's outer debris fields alongside elements of Battlefleet Baka, in the wake of raids that the Void captains whispered might have been linked to the Gothic War. Canonical histories name the Gothic War as an abyss of fleets and faith, a long bleeding at the edges of the Eye of Terror. To us, it was another set of coordinates where men died in the dark. In the hours before boarding action, I stood in the arming chamber and performed the rites over Penance 9. The oil smelled wrong, not corrupted, not tainted, simply wrong, like a scent associated with a memory you do not want. I froze, fingers on the weapon's casing. The memory surfaced without invitation, the cathedral's sweating stone, the hymn in the metal, the Aquila bleeding. My heart rate spiked despite my conditioning. My lungs drew in air too fast. I tried rationalization. I told myself the oil was from a different batch. I told myself the arming chamber's incense was thicker. I told myself I was tired. Then faintly I heard a hum in the deck plating. It matched the litany of true aim. I slammed my gauntlet down hard enough to dent the workbench and broke the hum's hold through pain, as I had on the moon. The other brothers glanced at me. No one spoke. In Astartes culture, visible fracture is contagious. After the battle, I went to the librarium and requested access to restricted archives on scrap code and warp mimetic phenomena. The librarians gave me texts on the Dark Mechanicum, on the Schism of Mars, on the cursed data plagues that had haunted Forge worlds since the heresy. They spoke of logic viruses and demon-possessed cogitators. None of it matched what we had faced. I sought out Kalen, now blind, his eyes replaced by augmetic lenses etched with wards. He sat in the librarius chapel, hands on a scroll as if he could read through touch. "You still hear it," he said without preamble. "Yes," I admitted. "It is not there," Kalen said, "not always. Sometimes it is memory, sometimes it is echo." "Echo of what?" I asked. Kalen's head tilted. "Of our desire for a voice that answers. I contacted Drax once, requesting a private audience. Vorn refused on his behalf. "The brother is under penance," Vorn said. "So are you, whether you admit it or not." My symptom persisted. A heightened sensitivity to hymns, to vox distortion, to any moment when machinery sounded too much like devotion. I began to avoid the chapel when the choir sang. I told myself it was to maintain combat readiness. That was a lie. Second time jump. Centuries later, I survived. Astartes often do, not because we are favored, but because we are used until we break. 183 years after Lyceron Secundus, I stood on the battlements of our fortress monastery during a season of ashfall, watching initiates drill in the courtyard below. Their movements were precise, eager. Their faith was unscarred. It should have comforted me. Instead, I watched their mouths as they recited the catechism of readiness. I listened for harmonies that were not taught. Chaplain Vorn had died by then, torn apart during a boarding action against a heretic cruiser in the Cadian Gate. In those years when Cadia still stood and the gate still pretended to be a border rather than a wound, his death was recorded as glorious. That was true, and it was incomplete. In his last decades, Vorn had become harsher, more rigid, as if he could hammer doubt out of himself by striking it in others. He had also begun in private to remove his skull helm and stare at his own face in a mirror for hours. The mirror did not answer him. Perhaps that was mercy. Kalen lasted longer. Psychers often do not. He became a thing of whispers and wards, sealed deeper in the librarius, consulted only when the warp pressed too close. Once I visited him. His augmetic lenses turned toward me without seeing. "It learned something from us," Kalen said. "What?" I asked. "That we will follow a voice," he replied, "if it sounds like salvation." "Is that weakness?" I asked, and regretted the question as soon as it left my mouth. Kalen's laugh was dry. "It is humanity, even in you, even in me." Drax's fate was the most instructive and the most cruel. He did not die in battle. He did not fall to obvious corruption. He became quiet, efficient, almost perfect. He requested to be reassigned to prolonged penitent crusades, always on the front line. He sought death as if it were the only absolution he trusted. 2 centuries after Lyceron, he got it. A Tyrannid splinter fleet struck the rimward systems. We fought in chitinous rain and acid wind. Drax held a breach alone while civilians evacuated. He fired until his barrels melted. When the swarm took him, he did not scream. Afterward, in the silence of the apothecarian Celine, old now, scarred, still calm, told me Drax's gene seed had been recovered. "It was clean," Celine said. "Clean," I repeated. Celine's gaze held mine. Clean does not mean unhurt. That became my ritual, born from trauma. After each battle, after each litany, I checked the rhythm of my own thoughts for any cadence that did not belong. I began to distrust comfort. I began to distrust answers that arrived too neatly. In those centuries, I encountered echoes. On a forge world in the Ultima Segmentum, a cogitator choir malfunctioned and began to output hymns in perfect harmony. The tech priests called it a blessing and sought to replicate it. I ordered it destroyed. They protested. I did not explain. The Inquisition questioned my authority. I cited battlefield necessity. The matter was filed, forgotten, and the forge world later suffered an outbreak of scrap code that killed 10,000. Was it connected? I will never know. That is the nature of the Imperium. Causality drowned in scale. Another scene. During the early years of the Indomitus Crusade in M42, when Robout Guilliman's return had shaken the Imperium like a bell struck after millennia of silence, I watched pilgrims on a transport ship weep openly, convinced that the Emperor's hand had moved at last. Their faith was a wildfire. It could warm. It could consume. I wanted to tell them about the mouth on Lyceron Secundus that had claimed to be compassion. I did not. What would it change? Would it make them wiser or merely hungrier for a voice they could trust? The full truth, I realized, might die with me not because it is forbidden, but because it is unusable. The Imperium is too vast for subtlety. It only understands extremes, miracle or heresy, saint or traitor, victory or extermination. I told one person, once, an initiate who had shown signs of unusual introspection, the kind that can become either wisdom or danger. I told him in the privacy of the reliquary chamber about Captain Holt's choice and about the hymn in the metal. The initiate listened, pale. When I finished, he asked carefully, "Sergeant, no, ancestor, how do we know the Emperor's voice when we hear it?" I could not answer. I could only tell him, "We do not chase voices, we chase duty, the rest is fog." He became a chaplain later. His sermons were stern. I wondered if I had saved him or poisoned him. Final reflection. Now, in the long accounting of my life, I understand that being sent to the front lines in this age is not merely to be placed where the enemy's guns can reach you. It is to be placed where meaning itself is under fire. We train to fear death, to despise it, to accept it, to deliver it. We did not train to fear comfort. We did not train to distrust answers shaped like prayers. We did not train for an enemy that does not only kill, but interprets. An enemy that takes your devotion and uses it as grammar. When duty becomes damnation is not a moment marked on a tactical map. It is a gradual shift, a small compliance, a single repeated hymn you did not choose to repeat. It is the point at which you mistake relief for righteousness. I remain loyal. I remain armed. I remain uncertain. That uncertainty is my penance and my hope. Final image. Sometimes in the quiet between wars, when the fortress monastery's corridors are dark and the only sound is the soft ticking of cooling armor, I press my gauntlet to my breastplate and wait. Now and then, beneath the ceramite, I feel a warmth like a pulse where no heart should be.